All right. Well, thank you everyone for being able to join this meeting. We really appreciate you taking your time this Monday night. Apologies if you can hear the train running behind me. But this is ADU's Advocacy 101 being put on by Abundant Housing Illinois. For those of you who have not heard of us before, we are a housing focused group making sure that we can expand the availability and the creation of housing across Chicagoland and statewide. And so tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about Chicago's efforts to re-legalize accessory dwelling units or ADUs, as well as some of the efforts that we are working on to make sure that that vote takes place and is approved at the City Council meeting on September 25th. So we have a few slides for you today that we'll be discussing. Also want to make sure that we introduce our guests, which I will in a few minutes, but just wanted to show everyone a little overview of what we'll be talking about tonight. We will make sure there's time at the end for Q&A. We have this set for about an hour, but if we do run over time, I'm happy to stay on and answer questions. My contact info is also going to be on the last slide, so if anyone wants to ask me questions not on here, happy to answer in that kind of side conversation. But next up, let me start by talking about what are ADUs. And as you can see here, accessory dwelling units, and I will just give a forewarning for anyone Chicago focused in the ordinance here. They call it additional dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units is the actual definition, but if you do see that terminology, just know that they're referring to the same things. In Chicago, you see these very commonly as coach houses, finished basement apartments, also somewhere, some people call them granny flats or in-law suites. These were very prevalent in Chicago for previous generations up until they were no longer legal in 1957. Currently, over the last few years, City Council has had a pilot program that is focused on, I believe, 5 neighborhoods, Stephen. So, what is happening on September 25th, and is really the impetus for this webinar tonight, is that there will be a vote on September 25th to permit ADUs citywide like it was prior to 1957. Okay, and without further ado, I will quickly introduce our featured presenters tonight. First off, we have Swasti Shah, who is the Director of Community Engagement at the Urban Land Institute Chicago. We have Adam Ballard from AARP Illinois, who's the Associate State Director of Advocacy and Outreach. And then we have Stephen Vance, the founder of Chicago Cityscape and one of the leads for Abundant Housing Illinois. So, without any further ado, Stephen, if you have anything to add, happy to let you chime in. But if not, I know Swasti has a few slides to present.
Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Josh, and Abundant Housing Illinois for putting this webinar together. ULI has been supportive of ADUs, and it's exciting to see that we are getting close to the finish line. I don't want to jinx it, but keeping our fingers crossed that we actually have a strong ADU program for the entire city. I like this photo a lot because, this just shows like a typical residential street in Chicago. And as you can see, ADUs are not really new to us. We can call them all kinds of names, but we had these types of buildings in our streets. These are basement units in single family homes, in 2 flats, 3 flats. So we've already been using them. And with that, maybe we move to the next slide. And thank you, Josh, for pointing out that these are often called by different names, which can be confusing, the terminology. It's accessory, additional. But I think part of it is also that they are used in so many different ways, right? And they can be in a variety of places. They can be in people's basements, attic, like backyards. There's just a variety of ways to build ADUs and use them. And I think the different nomenclature is a little bit reflective of that. So, but at the heart of it, an ADU really it's a smaller, smaller and completely independent dwelling unit. And by that, it means that it has to have a full bathroom and a kitchen and bedroom space. So that's what makes it a separate unit from your main one. And as you can see in this visual, they can be attached or detached. So there's like a basement. You can carve out space in basement to have a full unit. You could have a unit in your attic or the third floor space. They can also be in sort of in your backyard or your side yard if your lot is like that, that it can be attached to your primary unit. So these sort of ADUs are like that, and they can also be in your backyard, either over a garage as like sort of a double-story coach house, or they can be at the ground level, just a cottage in the backyard. So a lot of different ways to build them. They can be incorporated in single-family homes, 2 to 4 flats, and even larger multi-family buildings, because there's often like ground level and basement space that is not being utilized that could be repurposed into building out more residential units, which would be considered ADUs. So next slide. Why ADUs? Why do all of us want to see ADUs in Chicago? And so, and really everywhere. So lots of reasons for that. Housing choice. It really adds to the variety of housing options that we have in our neighborhoods. It's a great option for somebody wanting to live in a smaller space, wanting to downsize within their own neighborhood. My neighbors have a big coach house, which has been there since they've moved in here, but now they use that as our previous neighbors used to rent that coach house, but now this new family that has moved in, the dad stays there. So it's really nice that, you have a family living in the main house, and you can have grandparents, in-laws, like living that close to you. It just creates for a really nice intergenerational living arrangement. So it's really nice to have that option for people who want to utilize it. Housing stability. It can create housing stability for people who are homeowners who might be living in, it can even be just a single family house that does not yet have a coach house. But if you have the ability to add another unit, whether in your backyard or your basement, you suddenly have another source of income as well. And that can help pay your mortgage. It can help offset other costs. It can create, more stability for homeowners that way. And for folks who are looking to rent, usually ADUs, because they are smaller in size and they're built in non-primary spaces like backyards and basements, attics, they tend to rent at cheaper rents than, say, regular units in the same neighborhood. So it can be a more affordable way to live in a certain neighborhood. So that can, from the tenant's perspective, it can also create more stability. And then, when we were thinking about this, there's also a lot of concern of that Chicago losing its two housing stock, and many of them getting torn down and being replaced by single family homes. And so if we allow these ADU conversions to happen, and suddenly you have like another unit in that building, like, instead of just a 2-flat, now it's 3 units. And maybe that shifts the financial equation a little bit in keeping that building intact and actually adding more unit to it versus like taking it down and replacing it with one. So not that it will always work, but it definitely is one more consideration there. And sustainability and neighborhood vibrancy, almost 2 different things, and I've kind of clubbed them here together. But when you're adding more units within the same neighborhood using the same infrastructure, it's just inherently sustainable that way. And adding more people will just increase the customer base for businesses and create more vibrancy in neighborhoods where we are losing people. This could be a great way to add additional population and more density. Next slide. So ADUs in Chicago. how did ULI get involved? Well, it was part of like the housing work that we were doing in different neighborhoods, especially Albany Park, which had a lot of these 2 to 4 flats, and ADUs seemed to be like a really good alternative for them to maintain that affordability in sort of that environment. But also in conversations with different City of Chicago departments like DOH and DPD, that just it was something of great interest to them as well. Like, we are all familiar with like the rising affordability, or rather continuing, right? I mean, it's like we continue to have a shortage of affordable housing in Chicago. And while ADUs by themselves are not going to solve all of it, it can be one important tool in the toolkit, right? And the city's 5-year strategic plan at the time, it was 2019-2023, which was the current plan at the time, explicitly listed allowing ADUs as a strategy to help stem some of the affordability challenges. And then we partnered with Jeff Smith and Sarah Judah at the Institute of Housing Studies at DePaul University to start understanding, well, what could this opportunity look like in Chicago? What are we really talking about? What is our current landscape? Where would these ADUs go? So if you look at this map on the screen, except that the darkest brown, those are the RT and RM districts, are more like, which allow more than just single family. But the rest of it, from the light orange to the darker orange, those are all the RS1 zones, which are single family only. So with a few exceptions, and now, of course, with the palette zones, it's even more different. But these are essentially, so much of the city is essentially just meant for right now zoned for just single family homes, just one unit on one lot, which is inherently almost wasteful in my mind. And then looking at like the 2 to 4 flats that are already existing in Chicago, and IHS analyzed the Cook County assessor data for us, and nearly 77,000 of them, like, so that was more than 60% of them, had existing basements, full basements. So we don't know like what shape they are in, but they were so what that meant to us was that if you already have a basement, you have the infrastructure in place to potentially convert it into a residential unit. So right there, even if you just looked at our 2 to 4 flats, there was the potential of 77,000 more units being added in those basements, perhaps. And then, of course, there are coach houses, smattering of them all through. But as Josh mentioned, they were sort of zoned out or like made not legal like many decades ago. And like you can't really do improvements to them or bring them up to code. And you can't have them vacant for more than a year. So it's just like they're kind of dwindling. So that's sort of the lay of the land where ADUs are concerned now. Next slide, please. So it would be great to have ADUs legalized all over the city, but at the same time, it's important to remember that there are many challenges to getting them built. And so as we talk about like allowing them, we also should be mindful of how we go about doing that so people can actually build them. So of course, zoning and permitting is like kind of the very first barrier. Like there are places in the city that they are just simply not allowed, so you cannot build them. But even when you legalize them, there can be so many restrictions on where they can be sited, how big they can be, or what other requirements there might be from the building code as well, not just the zoning code, that could just make it really hard or almost impossible at times to actually create like a proper unit. So that can be a significant barrier. I recall, like, when we were working on these, we were talking to folks in Portland and elsewhere who had worked on ADUs, and they had an ADU program in place for a while. And, they one person put it as like, it can be death by 1,000 cuts. So, not any one restriction might be too crazy in its own and by itself, but like if you keep piling them on, like it might be too much, and then the homeowner is not going to be able to feasibly build an ADU. So it's like important to think about how flexible we are making things. cost of construction, everybody knows that it just continues to go through the roof. These are cheaper usually to build because you're using existing land, and in the case of basement units, your structure is already there. You're sort of maybe you're adding more height, but otherwise you're using existing space and fitting it out, which is inherently cheaper than like building, like getting like a new piece of land and building new. So inherently cheaper, yet not necessarily cheap. So it can be, that can be a barrier for many. And financing for ADUs is still kind of lagging. There are not a lot of specific products that would, like, if somebody wanted to go out and like get a loan for an ADU, that doesn't seem to exist in most situations. So people tend to use like options, like either they have their own savings that they can put towards it, which is very few people, or people like take out like second mortgages or HELOCs to finance these things. And those are just inherently challenging, and not a lot of people will have the resources to do things like that. So financing continues to be a challenge. And then just, straight up expertise. What's kind of neat about ADUs is that anybody like can do it. Like the homeowners can just do it, but that's also the flip side, is also the challenge that not all of we're all not going to have the expertise to really go through the whole process easily. We are not developers, like regular people are not developers. So thank you for specifying that, Stephen. So those are some of the challenges that I think are important to keep in mind, and how we solve for them as this, also push for legalizing ADUs. Next slide. So that was part of the work that we were doing to helping. So I should back up and for a second explain what ULI is. ULI, Urban Land Institute, we are a nonprofit organization. Our members are really like folks in the land use and the development world, both public sector, private sector. And part of what we do is help problem solve for these types of things. So what we did is we brought together 50 to 75 people, I think closer to 75 people from around Chicago. Like, so these are architects, planners, developers, builders, lenders, folks who have expertise in these matters, but are really interested in getting, to sort of figuring out what is the right way to build ADUs. So bringing them together and trying to identify what are some of the things that we should do. And so we have that report. It's publicly available, and there are a ton of good ADU resources on the website. So I put that link in there, but you can just Google ULI Chicago ADUs and you'll be able to access that. There are some webinars that the city's departments have put together as well. So they are hosted on that site. So our approach was to do that, to like bring all these people together, brainstorm ideas, look at what the data from IHS is telling us, and then put together a framework that the city can use, and hopefully other cities as well. So next slide, please. And I think this might be my last slide, but I just wanted to end with highlighting what we learned about ADU best practices. And this is what we tried to incorporate in our sort of the framework that we presented to the city. And I feel like they did a lot of this. They really incorporated a lot of these ideas. And the new ordinance that Alderman Lawson is proposing really takes it even further. So that's great. But I'm not going to read through all these bullet points, but the idea sort of in the heading that less regulation is more ADUs is really sort of my main message there, for all of the reasons that we described. Of course, you want to maintain health, safety, you want these units to be good units, but you want to not over regulate them to the point that no one can build them. And some of it is like, just allowing these to be built without having to go through like extra zoning steps, or like trying to make it a special use. Like, if it's as of right, people can just go sort of skip a whole bunch of those expensive and difficult to navigate steps and get to the point of starting to build their ADU if they so want to. And then sort of also important to, as we talked about, like how expensive these can be. So while I think these can be mostly a market-driven solution, but for middle and lower income homeowners, it would be like we want all of everyone to be able to access this opportunity. So the city programming, any kind of financial, technical support should be more heavily sort of in the favor of trying to support our middle and lower income property owners, homeowners who might be wanting to build ADUs. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. Good evening, everybody. My name is Adam Ballard, and as you heard in the introduction, I'm with AARP Illinois, working out of our Chicago office. And I've been working on ADUs for as long as I've been at AARP, which is about 4.5 years now. So this is both an important issue for AARP, both locally and nationally. You can see there the cover of our national publication, the ABCs of ADUs. In addition to all the great points that Swasti raised, and I'm going to do my best not to dwell on any of mine that are duplicative of hers. But this is a good resource, general resource, right? This isn't Chicago specific, but this publication is one that you can use to get a lot of good research and data supporting arguments for ADUs here and elsewhere as we take the fight, hopefully outside of Chicago after we get the win here very soon. I'm going to focus on as much as I can on making the argument, right? So and through messaging and how I want to push this through to get this over the finish line. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our first argument, which is that Swasti touched on, but you know, ADUs do offer affordable and flexible housing for all ages. We know what they are now, but they do, as Swasti said, they support multi-generational living. But what's really important for AARP members, they also provide housing for caregivers, right? And again, that's part of multi-generational living, but that could be a non-family caregiver too. Giving them a place to stay on the property can be an important life choice that people need to make. And again, also rental income, which is important to homeowners to have financial flexibility as they age. We did a national survey. I think this is a couple years old now, but we found that 69% of adults across the country, 50 plus, would consider living in an ADU to be close to family, to maintain independence. When we asked that question locally, I couldn't find the survey data that we did locally here when I was putting this together, but it was a little bit higher. I think it was something like 75% of people in the Chicago area answered that question affirmatively. Moving on, I guess, to the next slide, the next argument, the next message that we want to share. Again, touching on what Swasti already mentioned, ADUs do help address the affordability crisis. As a lot of us know, those of us who spend a lot of time in housing at least know, you know, over 30% of U.S. households are cost burdened, which means they spend over 30% of their income on housing. And ADUs generally cost, you know, significantly less, especially when we're talking about things like basement conversions or garage conversions on average than traditional homes. I don't know exactly the date of this data, if it was before or after really inflation started to hit construction costs, but relatively recently, average ADU construction in the state of California was about 166,000. I'm sure it's higher now, but compared to 494,000 for a single family home, which I'm also sure is significantly higher now. So hopefully that ratio has stayed at least mostly intact, even if the prices have gone up. In cities like Portland and Seattle, 60% of ADUs have been rented below market rate. Again, back to the argument that they are, in fact, a viable, affordable housing option. Next slide, please. So ADUs, and this is important for AARP and our membership again. They support aging in place and they reduce the cost of long-term care, right? So 90% of older adults who need long-term support live outside of nursing homes. Often due to high costs. It's over $100,000 a year in most places for nursing home care. And on top of that, most older adults don't want to live in nursing homes. So it's a question of, can they afford nursing home care, but do they even want it? And we believe that older adults should live lives of dignity and be able to live where they want throughout every stage of life. So anything that creates that option, and ADUs are one of those things, has our support. And as I said earlier, ADUs can house caregivers, family members, and offering a lot of affordable alternatives to institutional care. The next slide. ADUs do stimulate the local economy, as we heard Swasti say, and increase property value. They generate rental income, they support local construction jobs, and increase the housing supply, all things that are positives for communities. And homeowners can use, and often do use, ADUs to offset mortgage payments, property taxes. Places like here, Chicago and Cook County, where property taxes are exceptionally high, that's important, or other unexpected expenses. And again, the demand is building because of these reasons. In California, we saw ADU permits rise from 3% to almost 11% after legislation was passed in support of legalizing them basically statewide. And then finally, AARP Illinois is part of this fight to legalize ADUs citywide, to expand the current pilot program citywide. We did help pass the original ordinance in 2021, which has seen a lot of success so far, especially in higher income areas. We have seen a strong demand in lower income neighborhoods, but the financial barriers that Swasti mentioned are still in place. So therefore, we do support citywide legislation. The current offering from Alderman Lawson is one that we support. We would like to see this pass, and then maybe even revisit this and go further and further. Again, reduce regulation and open up access. But the first step is just to get this citywide ADUs in place. So we do support this legislation, and we want to see legalization, and eventually, hopefully sooner than later, programs to help families, again, at lower and middle incomes, afford ADU construction, permitting, all of that stuff. And we will continue to educate city council members on the benefits, both in the run up to this vote and, like I said, after we hopefully win this vote. That is all that I have right now. I do apologize, but I'm going to have to run here pretty quickly. But if there are questions for me specifically, Stephen, if you can maybe pass those along to me after, and I'll follow up by email with anyone who has questions for me specifically. But thank you all for having me, and it's been great to be here with you all.
Great, thank you so much, Adam. And also shout out to AARP nationally and in Illinois, because they have been producing the best research and the best documentation for normies like us, but also specifically for municipal officials to advise them, similar to how ULI Chicago did, on how to craft a good ordinance or state statute. It is now my turn. So I'm going to talk for 15 minutes about what we have to do as advocates to get the ordinance passed on September 25th. Before I get into those instructions and that advice, I want to talk about a little bit about the ordinance. So the ordinance number is on the screen. It was proposed in May 2024. It got a hearing, I think at that time actually, and then it got another hearing on July 15th and was approved by the zoning committee. And so the next step is to have a vote in city council, and that will happen on September 25th. But the basic facts of this ordinance are that it would expand the permission outside of the pilot areas. So it would actually dissolve the pilot areas and expand the permission to all R, B, and C zoning districts, except for C3, which does not allow housing. But that means in all of the single family zoning districts, all of the 2-flat districts, all of the mixed use districts, all of those would allow ADUs. For coach houses, the size cap would be eliminated. So right now, all coach houses are capped at 700 square feet, which is a somewhat large 1-bedroom apartment. But if anybody wanted to build a 2-bedroom apartment, the size cap doesn't really allow that. The other thing that it will allow is the removal of existing parking. So that means that somebody could build a ground level and accessible coach house. And I'm really excited about that part because it's also just a lot cheaper to build coach houses on the ground instead of 1 story up. One of our members who built a 2nd story coach house, a brand new construction, he estimates that it would have saved him $50,000 if he could have built it on the ground. And then his mother-in-law is living there. And so at some point when she can no longer climb stairs, she'll have to find a different place to live. But if he had been able to build it on the ground, then she could be there for longer. In the RS 1, 2, and 3 zoning districts, so those are the zoning districts that allow only single family houses with a minor exception in RS3, there would be a cap of 1, 2, and 3 permits per block per year, respectively. And I can say that I'm pretty sure that that cap will not be reached for a very long time on most blocks. If you do the math, it would take about 14 years for a typical block of an RS3 zoning district to kind of have every property have an ADU with that cap in place. And so that's about 50 some number of properties. I just don't see each block having that acceleration of ADUs. And then one of the guardrails that was put in place to gain support from several alderpersons was that in the single family zoned or single family areas of Chicago, those homeowners would have to obtain an administrative adjustment, which notifies the alderperson of their intention, but does not have an opportunity for that alderperson to intervene to prevent the ADU. So it is a balance in making sure that alderperson gets notified, making sure that adjacent neighbors get notified, and then creates like a 10-day delay until you can get a building permit, but does not prohibit the ADU. So I've got 3 steps of how advocates can get involved between now and September 25th. The first step is to sign the petition and sign it once, and then share it with friends, family, and neighbors. So the short URL, Josh, can you put this in the chat, is bit.ly/Chicago ADUs. There's also a QR code here. We're trying to get 3,000 signatures by September 24th, which is the day before the city council meeting, which we will summarize, remove duplicates, and send to Alderperson Lawson so that he has this information to share with his fellow city council members during the vote or just before the vote on September 25th. The second thing for advocates is to check this list of wards at the bottom. And if you live in one of those wards, then you have very specific instructions. It is to find fellow members in the same ward and request an in-person meeting or a scheduled call to talk about accessory dwelling units. These wards were specifically chosen for they're on the zoning committee and thus have a greater knowledge and awareness of ADUs, but have not yet decided where their position is, or based on past experience, we believe that they can be persuaded to vote in favor of ADUs. There are a number of alderpersons for which we did some political calculus, so to speak, to decide that it was not really worth our time to do outreach to those alderpersons, especially given that we have about 2 weeks to do this work. So Abundant Housing Illinois has a Slack for its members. Strong Towns Chicago also has a Slack for its members. Use either one to find fellow ward members, and you can also ask Josh and I, and we're in both of those Slacks, to link you up with other members in the same ward. And then third step is that if you cannot get a meeting to happen, would be to write a personal letter to your alderperson asking for them to support the ordinance. You could call it the ADU ordinance, or you can use the number here. But the idea behind this webinar was to use the information that Swasti provided about the history, combined with the information about why ADUs are so important, especially to senior citizens, the talking points that Adam gave to craft a personalized message based on your experience or what you would like to see for yourself and your community in the next few years. And then if you live in one of these wards, this is like bonus step. If you live in one of these wards, go ahead and thank your alderperson for their support of ADUs. And this list was created based on either a positive vote in the zoning committee or because these alderpersons have already indicated their explicit intent to vote in favor of ADUs on September 25th. And so the more support they can get from their constituents, the easier it is for them to vote in favor of what their constituents want. So Josh, turn it back to you.
Awesome. And one thing I will mention just from the previous slides, any of the resources that we share, we are happy to share with you. I think the one other thing that I would like to make sure we all get is, and I had referenced it on one of the slides, is that we are very happy to help with messaging, whether it will be something that you write in an email, or if you are interested in giving some kind of public comment or writing a letter to the editor of some sort. There are a lot of different ways we can talk about ADUs. Stephen, as you had said, and Adam had said, there are several reasons why an alderperson may think, oh, ADUs are good or not good for our community. And with some of the research that we've done, we've gotten a few ideas as to where the common misconceptions are about ADUs. And so we are more than happy to assist with crafting some of the messaging that you can use. But as Stephen had said in the last point, it is really about your personal narrative and personal story. You've all chosen to be on this webinar tonight, which means for one reason or another, you feel that ADUs would be helpful for the Chicago community and making sure they're re-legalized. We are happy to help with the messaging, and we can give you something of a skeleton template to work from, but it's also going to be important, especially with reaching out to your own individual respective alder people, that you put some of that personal flair into it. And so we are more than happy to assist and give kind of guidance as to, all right, here is, some of the ways that you can discuss this. So with this upcoming step, and we will we'll open it up for questions in a little bit after this, but our biggest activation is going to be at the City Council meeting Thursday, September 25th. And as Abundant Housing Illinois has done in previous months, we are really encouraging turnout for members as well as other folks within the community who feel that this is an important issue to talk about. One kind of forewarning I will give about city council meetings, very different from zoning committee meetings, where you will kind of see that there is a huge turnout at city council meetings. And so we would recommend arriving, while it says it will start at 10 a.m., there's usually about 15-20 minutes late they start. And if you are someone who wants to give public comment on this, and I will be there hoping to give public comment, since there will usually be an overflow crowd, they will end up doing a lottery for public comment, who can give public comment. And so one thing, as I mentioned on messaging, we are happy to draft and put together some of the very, similar talking points that we had said here, but again, incorporating some of your own feedback and your own kind of thoughts to it is really the best way to make sure that your narrative gets through. And so we are happy to assist and also answer any questions as to, how can we best kind of convey these points. And so there's an RSVP link on there, and I know we will share that after this meeting ends. We're going to have some time here for Q&A, so happy to answer right now, but if there's anything that you want kind of more information on, would be easier to write it out, or you don't want to ask it in front of everyone, you can reach out to me. My contact information is down below. As Stephen had also mentioned, Abundant Housing Illinois and Strong Towns Chicago are two of the main organizations leading the effort to draw out attendance at these meetings. And so if you are interested in learning more about the organizations or about any of the other activities going on, we would be happy to invite you to the Slack channels that we have and or add you to our respective email newsletters.
Why don't you explaining what it's like to be in city council chambers?
Yes, would be happy to. So if you have never attended a city council meeting, and again, I'm going to kind of preface this by some of you may have attended zoning committee meetings with us in the past. I want to say city council meetings on their own are quite different than that. Just as kind of administrative knowledge, city council is made up of the 50 alder people, so each of them having a vote on this. And so what we are looking for at the end of the day on Thursday the 25th is that we get a yes vote approving ADUs, which would mean 26 alder people vote in favor of it. We don't want there to necessarily be a situation where we're coming down to the final vote. And so really we are hoping to get 30, if not more, to say yes. But again, we're gonna keep working, which is why we laid out some of these, area alder people who we think we can kind of reiterate our points to. But at the city council meeting, what will happen is there is an order of, run of show, which will always begin by the public comment period. And so the reason why we would suggest, if you are interested in giving public comment, to try and arrive early and to make sure that you give yourself a chance to be on that lottery system. You'll typically get 2 to 3 minutes to speak. And really it's something where you want to make sure you're getting your point across. It doesn't necessarily need to be narrative heavy. You are talking to the members of city council and trying to make sure they understand your story. This public comment period usually lasts about 30 to 45 minutes. And then once that wraps, and I will again go back a step, with a major city council meeting that only happens once a month, we are not going to be the only stakeholder group there. And while ADUs are the main topic that we are focused on, there are several other initiatives going on. I know, Stephen, you had mentioned the Plow the Sidewalks campaign, which is being put on by Better Street Chicago and Access Living, and they are focused on a program that will plow sidewalks in certain areas of the city, expanding a pilot program that was approved last year. And so there will be disparate groups that all have things that they want to be focused on, which is why if the random lottery for public comment is not the best way to go about things, because there's a potential that, all right, if 15 people get to speak, maybe they randomly draw 10 of them who are from an organization focusing on something else completely. So with that, I'll say once you get through the public comment period, it is a relatively boring part of City Hall that lasts, I will say, maybe an hour plus, where they go over recognitions and spotlights of individuals and initiatives going on in the community. And so what I would almost recommend, and because city council, the chambers rooms fill up quickly, is that if you are someone who does want to give public comment, I again will be there and happy to help kind of chaperone people around. If you do want to give public comment, do try to arrive by 9:30. If you are not someone who wants to give public comment or the timing of that doesn't work for you, city council meetings usually last until 1 or 2 p.m. And again, it kind of varies based on all the stuff that's on the agenda. But when there is a city council meeting and you have a big crowd that attends, typically all of the people in the audience want to be there in the room at 10 a.m. And there will be a line down the hallway in City Hall because you have to go through metal detectors. And so it almost becomes less useful for you to go if you're not able to get in early enough, where you're going to be sitting there maybe outside for an hour. Sometimes there's a second viewing room that they open up. But in terms of the actual content that we're focused on, I'm not sure the agenda has been put out yet. But I'm not 100% certain as to when the ADU vote specifically would take place. And so city council meetings are frustrating in that regard. If you are someone who works remotely, you are able to bring a laptop there. You can bring a tote bag full of anything, no backpacks, but you are able to, if you have like a reusable shopping bag, stick a laptop in there. No food or drink. That is something where I have gotten around those types of things by having a sealed water bottle or making sure you only have like a granola bar or something that isn't too, crazy. I wouldn't bring a full meal in there, but I definitely think that you would be fine. But when in doubt, just exercise caution. Clive, I see your message. With City Hall, you don't have to like necessarily do anything to get into a city council meeting. Everyone is welcome to attend. The one thing I will again reiterate is that the city council meetings tend to draw a lot of various parties. And so when you get there, depending on when you get there around 10 a.m., there may be a long line where they kind of delay you getting in and basically if there's not enough seating, you start to see people leave after the public comment period ends. And so if you're not trying to give public comment and you only get there in time for the recognitions where they just give a bunch of kudos and have a bunch of alder people give, say congratulations to someone on their retirement, et cetera, et cetera. So you're really going to, if you're focusing just on the ADU vote, and also this takes place in City Hall, I believe it's 50 West Washington in the main chamber room on the second floor. But when you get there, it's really like depending on the agenda and the order of operations, that's when they'll be discussing ADUs. But even if you're not there for ADUs and you just want to go be in attendance, everyone is welcome. It really just depends on, what time you want to get there and how long you'd be willing to wait in line if they don't let you in right at the beginning. But last thing I'll say on this point is like, again, meeting starts at 10, half an hour or so of public comment. You're, I would say, close to 11 by the time, all right, that part is done. Then you get into recognitions, and that could last anywhere up to an hour, depending on kind of what things are being, celebrated and or resolutions. I know that there was one for Pride Month, something like that. If you don't necessarily want to be there for that, you are able to get in at like 11:30 or noon. So you can really go at any time of the day or watch virtually, which is something that if you are someone who is working or can't necessarily attend, absolutely recommend using the virtual link.